This is TWiT.
There was a series of tweets that went out, and it was about DHH, who is the, co-creator or the creator of Ruby on Rails. He signed up for the Apple Card, and his wife signed up for the Apple Card. And when he signed up for the Apple Card, he had a giganto credit limit. And he and his wife filed their tax return together. There are all these things that point to them both being ranked by algorithms exactly the same. Her credit score was higher than his even, and all of these things that pointed to when she signed up, you would think that she would have the same credit limit. For some reason, she had a much smaller credit limit, much smaller credit limit, and also there was another bit of a barrier added on her account where, say she spent $30 somewhere with her Apple Card. If she were to go and pay that $30 on her card, she wouldn't actually gain access to that credit limit addition until the next statement came through. So all these barriers were being put on her account for some reason, and he wasn't sure why, and she wasn't sure why. And so they reached out to both Apple support, and then it seems like they spoke to Goldman Sachs, and DHH, that's at DHH on Twitter, was sort of talking about how this all went down and what every step of this was. And while this was going on, while the complaints were being made, then suddenly her credit limit jumped to the same one that he had. And there was no clear communication about why the credit limit had changed. When they spoke to some support teams, the support team said, look, we don't know. It's a black box. It's the algorithms determine things, and we're not sure why you originally didn't have that credit limit and you do now. And so he said, speaking to both Apple and Goldman Sachs, the people that they were able to talk to, no one knew why the system had done it differently. And there was an original claim, from DHH that this was an example of bias in AI and artificial intelligence that led to a sexist decision that resulted in him having a higher credit limit than his wife, because he was trying to find other ways to show, or to come across some other means to show why she would have a lower credit limit, despite the fact that she had a higher credit score. The only other point that I want to add before we break into the discussion here is that there's a New York organization that's in charge of making sure that New York's laws, financial laws, are followed. And I wish I could remember the name of the department, but basically they're doing a Goldman Sachs probe now to determine if laws were broken, because in New York, it is illegal to discriminate against someone financially based on their sex. And I assume that that's the case in many places, but I can't speak for some states. Who knows? So yeah, that all has been going on, and DHH now has sort of been out in the open about this, and Steve Wozniak even got involved and said that he and his wife had the same thing, where he had a higher rating or had more money than she did. So let's talk about this.
So I don't know a lot about it. In fact, I've spent most of my life with a lower credit limit than my wife. So she's much better about those things than I am. But I did consult with some folks that know a little bit more than I do about this, and one of the things that they said is what we don't know. They're not saying that it's right, and they said they should absolutely look at the algorithm. They should absolutely look at before we start running around with torches. What they brought up was what we don't know about that is, number one, is the credit score is not the only thing. So your credit score is not the only thing they use that the algorithm uses to calculate it. There is credit utilization. So there's the how much of your credit are you using, and how much is and it's also credit utilization history across a long period of time. It can be looking at those things. What has your credit limit been for the last decade or last 7 years or whatever? So so there's a running average of that process. Also, who applied first? If you have joint financials, one person getting a lot of credit can affect the other person's ability to do the same thing. So they're not saying that it is that there could be something very wrong with the algorithm. They said it's not probably something that is vicious. It's probably something that is just an odd, it's just picked up something that it's not doing correctly, and they can it'll it'll get fixed. It's something that needs to be addressed and needs to be looked at. But there are other factors, at least that I'm told. And again, I'm not the expert on this area, but I'm told that there are other factors in that calculation that are probably creating the errata that people are seeing. And it's probably not errata that's occurring for everyone. It's probably there's a handful of things that are happening that cause the algorithm to flip, and they're definitely going to look at it, and they definitely should. But it's probably not someone in there trying to make it one way or the other or having any opinion about it. It's an algorithm that's just looking at a bunch of numbers.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out that DHH even says in the series of tweets, I am not under the assumption that there's some nefarious human being out there making this sexist decision. He was bringing the seemingly sexist decision to light. He was bringing it to light and saying, look, this is what's going on, and nobody's able to answer the question, and that's where the problem exists.
Yeah, the thing that the person that I talked to, or the folks that I referred to, is that the number one thing is you have to have people who can answer the phone that can solve the problem. Like that it's not that the algorithm is going to be perfect. It's just that you can't put people in a circle when they can't figure it out. When something's obviously wrong, there has to be someone that you can get to make that decision and fix that decision. And there's just always going to be error corrections in this process. I mean, and if you call, I mean, I've called credit cards and just gotten them to give me, another $5,000 or $10,000 by arguing with them about it, and then they pop it up. So, their algorithm said one thing, and then you talk to them, and a human looks at it, and then they make an adjustment.
Yeah, this is the sort of stuff that I was afraid of when Apple announced that they were launching this credit card with Goldman Sachs. That there's the credit industry is not known for good customer service. They're not known for really good customer outcomes. And every time that there's a screw up like this, whether it's intentional sexism, whether it's a black box algorithm that they have to unwind and figure out why it's doing that, or as Alex says, there's a lot of wiffle dust that goes into the decision of how much credit to offer somebody, Apple still gets that stink on them, and it's not they can't parry it off on Goldman Sachs. Because they decided to get in bed with this company that wanted desperately to get into the credit business, or excuse me, the consumer credit card business. And this is the same company that 2 years ago got fined $5 billion for their part in the housing lending crisis, of actually deceiving investors about the value of these notes that they were putting out to people. So I continue to wonder why Apple feels it really necessary to be in this business to begin with. There must be a hell of a lot of money involved, because there is so much PR downside. They can't absolve themselves and saying, oh well, we designed that really wonderful titanium card, and we're the guys who put together the app. We're the people who put together the app. We're not responsible for actual credit approval. We're not responsible for collection agencies going after people. It is the Motorola rocker of financial instruments for them, where they can't say that there's this terrible product that does things that they wish didn't do, but they were involved in it. They decided to put their name on it, and they are in bed with these people. They have to deal with it.
And one thing too is that again, DHH is has been making responses based on what people have said, and one of the things is that people are like, why are you so upset about this? This is common everyday banking practice. And that is what he's saying, is that's the thing I take issue with, is the fact that yes, this might be depending on your particular situation or whatever it happens to be, but he's saying that's not cool, particularly because, as you note, Andy, Apple is saying, oh, we've made a different card. It's different from other credit cards. It's different from this. Goldman Sachs has put out a statement, and according to the statement, it says, we have not and never will make decisions based on factors like gender. In fact, we do not know your gender or marital status during the Apple Card application process. We are committed to ensuring our credit decision process is fair. Together with a third party, we have reviewed our credit decision process to guard against unintended biases and outcomes. They go on to say that they're going to, if folks are in particular situations that are affected by this, that you can contact them and get more support. But again, I think that this just goes back to the original conversation that we're having about making sure that there's someone there who can actually answer this question and fix the problem if there's an issue that's there.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, I mean, from my perspective, it's a credit version of the Intent-A-Gate. Like it just didn't work as well as they thought it would, and then they fixed it on the next one. And I think that Apple's, there's going to be some bumps in the road. I think that Apple had to work with Goldman Sachs because Apple, like the reason that Apple didn't work with Verizon, they worked with AT&T because AT&T was willing to give Apple what it wanted to make changes to the way a phone works. Goldman Sachs gave Apple a lot of leeway in a way that no other credit card was going to give. Apple gave Goldman Sachs and AT&T opportunity to move into a market extremely quickly, but that was the payoff. That was the negotiation, I'm sure, or the calculation that a lot of them made in that process. And so Apple's getting able to continue to move this down the path, and we should expect more hiccups along the way. But I haven't talked to a lot of people that are overall upset about their Apple Card, and I think that this is again slowly boiling a financial frog that I don't think Apple's done with.
Yeah, another way of putting it is that your point is taken, but another way of putting it is that Apple wanted to open this card on their terms without having to negotiate as hard as without having to give up as much as they would want to, and eventually, they were reduced to dealing with a known to be shifty financial company. So, there's a lot to unwrap here. Their intentions and the actual results are unknown at this point. But my personal thought is that the obligation is on Goldman Sachs to make sure that they make a really, really strong case that they are not guilty of any wrongdoing. And Apple has to continue to make a good case that they did not make a mistake by getting into cahoots with Goldman Sachs. I hope I'm not overstating this. It might sound as though I'm saying that Goldman Sachs is an evil, jerk company that nobody should touch. But again, the housing lending crisis was not an oops. It wasn't an unrestricted market. It was the FTC agreed that this was malfeasance that needed a $5 billion correction. That's something that, again, if that appeared, imagine Goldman Sachs filing out a credit report and saying, oh, well, geez, see here that you were cheating investors out of money and also locking individual consumers into loans that you knew that they would not be able to ever pay back. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to give you this opportunity today, Goldman Sachs, he says, feeding it into a shredder. But this is the problem that Apple faces.
Now, Lori, do you use Apple Card?
I do, yes.
Did you have any issues with sign up or anything like that? How have you found the card?
I have so many feels to unpack right now, so bear with me on this. First of all, I think that Hansen, DHH, he went about all of this completely wrong. And I personally take a little bit of offense to the Apple Card is sexist. That bothers me because, being somebody who has faced sexism in my lifetime, using this unknown, I don't know why my wife's credit score or credit approval was lower than mine, and just throwing that sexism card at it reduces my sexism issues that I've actually had that I know for sure come from something like that. So when I hear this kind of thing, like my hackles are up of like, what do you mean? How can you prove this? And throwing that out there reduces the times when I say that I've been the victim of sexism. So I'm immediately upset by that. So I have to put that out there and say that, like, his first sentence in his first tweet is the Apple Card is such an effing sexist program. And you know what that also means? It means that the rest of the internet is going to report that. So he is not a reporter. It's not his job to be unbiased and to be clear and say things that are accurate. He's okay with that on Twitter to do that. But the rest of the blogging world jumped on it and turned it into this like rolling boil of what is Apple doing wrong? What is Goldman Sachs doing wrong? When there is very, very little evidence one way or another about the situation. So that's to me where everything went wrong, where the crap hit the fan and this shouldn't have been reported on the way it was reported on. Because what you've said quite a few times and what I think is actually true is it's not about the Apple Card is sexist, which is what everyone reported after he tweeted that. It's that the credit industry in general is not transparent for us. And specifically in this case, this black box idea of that we don't question it. So the people that worked at Goldman Sachs, those representatives that he spoke to that kept saying, it's an algorithm, I don't have access to it, I don't know, it's an algorithm, the algorithm is there, I trust that. That's dangerous. And it's good that this is being called into question of maybe there is an accidental bias in here that does need to be addressed, and to bring that to light of like, hey, we need to be looking into whether or not this is has any kind of bias, unintentional, in this locked algorithm that we don't know about. That's the stuff that needs to be reported on, not this like blowing up of Apple Card is sexist. And so I find the whole thing very frustrating, and I certainly don't want to defend the way Goldman Sachs' algorithm works or Apple's relationship with Goldman Sachs in this endeavor, because number one, Goldman Sachs should be a little more transparent and have a better way to access algorithms so that we can understand how those kinds of things are determined. And number two, Apple should, they're holding hands with Goldman Sachs, so their reputation is tarnished when Goldman Sachs' reputation is tarnished, and they need to be more proactive about doing something about it. Okay, I think I got it all out.
Lori, I want to apologize for not leading with you, and I mean that sincerely. I really should have.
It gave me time to listen to everyone else's the way they addressed it, and it gave me some more information in my own head about, yes, this is true, and no, I don't believe that. And so it was good. I had a good way to barf that out at everybody.
I'm glad you had time to percolate.
and the one thing that I'm always surprised by that companies don't do at almost every level is pay attention to social scores. So when someone calls you, you should immediately be able to know how many Twitter followers they have.
Yeah.
But I'm always amazed at, because, you can always tell the companies that do, because they respond very, very quickly to a lot of these things. And there's a lot of great tools. Salesforce, I think, bought one called Radian 6 that I think is now some kind of social studio or whatever they call it. And there's other tools out there, but I'm always amazed at a hotel, at a restaurant, at that they're not carving, pulling up that information. If some guy who is a founder who has a lot of followers calls you, they should literally, in my opinion, go to another person, and not be, and it's just, this is less to do with credit scores and everything else, but just as a company, you should know what the impact's going to be to give that person. They used to say that an angry, an angry customer would lead to 10. It would hit 10 people. Now it's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people and it creates this huge process. But it's and it's not that you shouldn't treat everybody. You should treat everybody well, but there is a certain level of crisis management that goes into this person can cause a lot of trouble really fast.
It can cause a lot of trouble and a lot of misinformation, which leads to more customers being harmed in the process, or potentially harmed in the process. So yeah, I agree with the concerns about preferential treatment there, obviously, but I do think that there is some impact on making sure that... And
I'm not saying that's fair, by the way.
Right, yeah. It's not
I'm
that
just saying
fair,
that's right. It's just good company policy. It's very unfair.
It's very unfair, but you think it's a good idea.
It's very unfair, but if you're a company that does this, that there are a lot of companies that do it. So let's just be clear. It's not... this is a very popular thing, and the fact that they're not interacting with this, there's a huge number of companies that already are pretty clear of what's actually happening there.
Yeah. This is something to continue to watch. Of course, like I said, the department is looking into Goldman Sachs, and so there will be eventually a clear answer to make sure that these algorithms that are put in place are doing the right thing, and that it's the black box is going to be, grayed a little bit, so we'll be able to see a little bit into them. Not to keep plugging triangulations, but to keep plugging triangulations. I also had the privilege just recently of interviewing Ruha Benjamin on her book Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code. And in this book, Ruha Benjamin, who is an associate professor of African American studies at Princeton, talks about biases in tech and particularly in AI, and how the very popular data sets on which our modern AI engines are built came with a whole lot of biases in place, and how even still we think of artificial intelligence and algorithms and these things as completely separate from humans. They're computers that think like Vulcans do. And the fact is they don't. They were created by, and I'm sure someone's going to quibble with me, I understand, but you get the point. They were originally created by humans and with the help of humans feeding these data sets and training these data sets. And so the fact is human bias still plays a role in those things. So that's a great conversation if you want to, or book there. Again, Race After Technology by Ruha Benjamin.